The cold air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and despair, a stark contrast to the brightness of the sun that dared to shine over the barbed wire fences of the prisoner of war camp. Liesl Müller stood amongst the other women, her heart pounding in her chest as she forced herself not to stare. She couldn't believe her ears. The distant sound of laughter echoed through the cold morning air, a sound that felt utterly alien against the backdrop of her reality. Everything she had been taught, every warning from her superiors, every fear that had kept her alive for months screamed at her to look away, but she couldn't. A small group of British soldiers had just entered the compound, their sharp uniforms contrasting starkly with the drab, worn-out attire of the prisoners. Liesl's gaze latched onto one soldier in particular, Corporal James Thompson. He was different from the others. There was a softness in his eyes, an air of kindness that disarmed her. She could hardly reconcile this image with the monstrous figure her upbringing had painted in her mind. As the soldiers gathered to distribute rations, Liesl felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, fear mingled with an inexplicable curiosity. Her heart raced not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline of the unknown. The enemy was so close, yet they seemed so far from the caricatures she had been raised to believe in. What could possibly change her view of the enemy? This single moment would redefine her entire world. Before we uncover why, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now back to 1945. The year was 1945, and the war had taken its toll on everyone, especially here in this makeshift camp located in the rural expanse of Germany. The landscape was bleak, a patchwork of muddy grounds and dilapidated barracks, each one a testament to the harshness of their reality. Liesl's heartache was compounded by the chilling wind that seemed to seep through her thin clothing, a constant reminder of both her physical and emotional state. The war had stripped away her youth, leaving her feeling like a mere shadow of her former self. As she shivered under the thin wool of her coat, memories surged back, memories of her childhood spent in the embrace of Nazi propaganda. She had been taught to view the Allies as subhuman, monstrous figures intent on destroying her homeland. The tales of their brutality had seeped into her mind like poison, solidifying her fear and hatred. In the camp, those feelings were magnified, feeding into her dread every time she caught sight of the British soldiers patrolling the grounds. They were the enemy, the embodiment of all her fears. But today was different. Rumors had been swirling among the prisoners about changes in the guard, whispers of new leadership that might bring harsher treatment. The uncertainty was suffocating, and Liesl could feel the walls closing in on her. Each day dragged on, her spirit dampened by the weight of despair. But in that moment, as she watched the soldiers interact with one another, she felt an unfamiliar sense of hope flicker within her, a small light in the darkness. The tension in the camp was palpable, humming in the air like the electric charge before a storm. Liesl's mind raced, caught between her ingrained apprehensions and an unsettling curiosity about the men in front of her. Could they really be as monstrous as she had been led to believe? The fear she had carried for so long began to crack, allowing a sliver of doubt to creep in. She needed to see more, to understand. As the soldiers began to distribute rations, Liesl's heart thrummed loudly in her chest. Her eyes darted between the faces of the soldiers and her fellow prisoners. The laughter that had echoed moments before now felt like a distant memory that clashed violently with her understanding of who these men were. They were supposed to be her enemies, the ones who had taken everything from her. Yet, as she watched Corporal Thompson break off a piece of his own ration and offer it to a frail woman beside her, she felt her perception begin to shift. Why would he do that? She thought, grappling with the dissonance in her mind. This was not the behavior of a monster. This was the act of a human being. The warmth of his smile, the kindness in his gesture, began to unravel the tightly woven threads of propaganda that had shaped her beliefs. Liesl felt an overwhelming urge to understand the man behind the uniform, to see him beyond the labels she had grown up with. But could she allow herself to do that? The fear of betrayal to her upbringing loomed large, yet here was a chance for something more, something real. She was standing at a precipice, staring into the depths of her own convictions, her mind racing with the implications of this encounter. What if everything I've been taught is a lie? She thought, her heart aching with the weight of this newfound revelation. The moment hung in the air, thick with tension, each second stretching into an eternity. Liesl's breath caught in her throat as she fought against the instinct to look away. to retreat back into the safety of her ignorance. But she couldn't. She couldn't deny the humanity she saw before her, and in that moment she began to question everything. What was it that made someone an enemy? Was it the uniform, the allegiance, or was it something deeper, something more complex that transcended borders and ideologies? Liesl felt her world shifting beneath her feet, a tectonic change that would reshape her understanding of war, of humanity, and of herself. The cold wind howled around her, but she stood still, transfixed by the soldier who dared to show compassion in a world awash with violence. The first crack in the wall of her beliefs had formed, and she could not turn back. The cold air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and despair, a stark contrast to the brightness of the sun that dared to shine over the barbed wire fences of the prisoner of war camp. Liesl Müller stood amongst the other women, her heart pounding in her chest as she forced herself not to stare. She couldn't believe her ears. The distant sound of laughter echoed through the cold morning air, a sound that felt utterly alien against the backdrop of her reality. Everything she had been taught, every warning from her superiors, every fear that had kept her alive for months, screamed at her to look away. But she couldn't. As she focused on the British soldiers milling about just outside the camp, she felt a strange pull. They were laughing, their voices rising and falling like a melody, and with each note, her resolve cracked a little more. Nearby, a fellow prisoner, a woman named Greta, nudged her shoulder. "Liesl, stop staring. They are the enemy, remember?" But Liesl's mind was a tumult of confusion. She had been raised in a world where the British were painted as monsters, devoid of compassion. And yet, here they were, sharing moments of levity, their faces animated with expressions she had never associated with the enemy. Her gaze drifted back to the soldiers, eyes lingering on one in particular. Corporal James Thompson, a man with a quick smile and a lightness in his stance, seemed to embody warmth. He crouched down, engaging with a small group of prisoners, his gestures open and inviting. Liesl shivered, not from the cold, but from the dissonance of her perceptions. The propaganda that had been drilled into her since childhood was at war with the reality that stood before her. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the camp like wildfire. Rumors of a change in leadership among the guards surfaced, igniting fear among the prisoners. Liesl's stomach churned at the thought. Would the new guards be even more cruel? Would they see them as less than human? The apprehension hung heavily in the air, and the laughter of the British soldiers began to feel like a distant memory, swallowed by the growing dread. The nights were the hardest. Liesl lay on her thin mattress, the coarse fabric scraping against her skin, replaying the sounds of that day in her mind. She remembered the way James had looked at her, his eyes warm and curious, as if she were more than just a number in a camp. A flicker of hope ignited within her, but it was quickly doused by the weight of her upbringing. How could she reconcile these feelings with the loyalty she had sworn to her country? One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, Liesl found herself drawn to the wire fence. She leaned against it, staring into the distance where the British soldiers had been stationed. A mixture of fear and longing gripped her heart. Would she ever have the courage to speak to one of them? What if they were not the monsters she had been led to believe? "Liesl!" Greta's urgent whisper broke her reverie. "Come away from there, you'll get in trouble." But Liesl couldn't move. "What if they're not what we think?" she whispered back, her voice barely audible. "What if they're just like us?" Greta shook her head in disbelief. "You're losing your mind. They are the enemy. You must remember that." But Liesl's heart was restless, and the laughter from earlier echoed in her ears, taunting her with the possibility of a different narrative. She had witnessed the kindness hidden beneath the uniforms, and it terrified her. What would it mean for her beliefs, for her identity? As the days turned into weeks, the tension within the camp thickened. New guards were indeed assigned, and with them came a palpable shift in atmosphere. Liesl could see the fear in the eyes of her fellow prisoners as they shared hushed conversations about the possibility of harsher treatment. Each day felt like a countdown to an inevitable clash between hope and despair. One chilly morning, as she trudged through the mud towards the communal area, she spotted James again. This time, he was handing out rations. Liesl's heart raced. Would this be her moment? She felt a tug at her conscience, the gravity of her upbringing pulling her back, while curiosity propelled her forward. "Liesl, what are you doing?" Greta's voice broke through her thoughts, but she was already moving. The crowd of prisoners turned their eyes to her as she approached the soldiers. She felt exposed under their scrutiny. her heart hammering in her chest. "Hey there," James called out, a bright smile lighting up his face as he caught her gaze. "You look like you could use something to eat." His kindness was a direct contradiction to everything she had been raised to believe. The dissonance was deafening. I'm fine," she stammered, her voice trembling, betraying her inner turmoil. "Are you sure?" He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You don't look fine. Come on, take some." He extended a piece of bread towards her, and in that moment, the world around them faded away. Liesel's mind raced. The bread felt symbolic, a lifeline thrown across the chasm of hatred she had been taught to embrace. This simple act of kindness shattered the barriers she had built around herself. The reality of who she was, of who they were, began to unravel, piece by piece. What do you think will happen when Liesel finally meets the British soldiers? Share your thoughts below. The question lingered in the air and Liesel felt the weight of it. She stood on the precipice of change, standing against the tide of her past beliefs, staring into the depths of her future. Would she grasp that bread, that lifeline, and allow herself to step into a new world? Or would she retreat back into the shadows of her upbringing, afraid of what lay beyond? As she stood there staring into James's earnest eyes, she took a deep breath. The moment was electric, charged with the potential for both connection and conflict. Would she dare to step forward into this unknown? If you find these stories of human connection and understanding compelling, consider subscribing to our channel. Help us share these important narratives that remind us all of our shared humanity, even in the darkest of times. Your support allows us to keep exploring the stories that matter. Thank you for being part of this journey. The cold air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and despair, a stark contrast to the brightness of the sun that dared to shine over the barbed wire fences of the prisoner of war camp. Liesel Müller stood amidst the other women, her heart pounding in her chest as she forced herself not to stare. She couldn't believe her ears. The distant sound of laughter echoed through the cold morning air, a sound that felt utterly alien against the backdrop of her reality. Everything she had been taught, every warning from her superiors, every fear that had kept her alive for months screamed at her to look away. But she couldn't. A small group of British soldiers had just entered the compound, their sharp uniforms contrasting starkly with the drab, worn-out attire of the prisoners. Liesel's gaze fixated on one soldier in particular, Corporal James Thompson, whose laughter rang like a melody in a world filled with dissonance. Despite the grime smeared across his face, his twinkling eyes and warm smile radiated an undeniable humanity, a stark juxtaposition to the monstrous image she had been taught to believe in. As the soldiers moved closer, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The laughter subsided, but the tension grew thick like fog. She could hear the low murmurs among the women, their voices tinged with fear and confusion. "What do they want?" someone whispered. "Do they mean to torment us further?" The whispers morphed into a chorus of speculation, and Liesel felt the weight of their collective anxiety pressing down on her. James stepped forward, breaking from the group. He appeared to be scanning the faces of the prisoners, his expression shifting from joviality to something more solemn as he locked eyes with Liesel. A jolt of recognition coursed through her. This was the face of an enemy. Yet as his gaze softened, a flicker of empathy shone through, cutting through the darkness that enveloped her heart. "Oi!" James called out, his voice warm and inviting. "We've got some rations to share." The words hung in the air, pregnant with disbelief. Liesel's instinct screamed at her to turn away, to retreat into the safety of her learned hatred, yet she found herself rooted to the spot. Her heart raced as she watched James approach the fence that separated them, the laughter of his comrades fading into a haunting echo. "Here, take this," he said, extending his hand through the barbed wire, offering a small piece of bread. It was a simple gesture, yet it felt monumental. She was torn between the overwhelming urge to reject his kindness and the desperate hunger gnawing at her insides. Time stretched as she hesitated, her mind racing with thoughts of propaganda and the enemy she had been conditioned to fear. This couldn't be right, she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. These were the monsters, weren't they? The moment stretched thin, and in that instant, she saw the truth in his eyes, a reflection of her own vulnerability. She felt the tears welling up, threatening to spill over, as a battleground of emotions raged within her. With trembling hands, she reached forward, her fingers brushing against his. The warmth of the bread contrasted sharply with the chill of her surroundings, and she felt an inexplicable bond forming, one that transcended the lines drawn by war. "Thank you," she whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. A wave of shame washed over her as she realized she was thanking the enemy, the very person she had been taught to despise. But in that moment, all of her conditioning began to crumble. She could see the humanity in James, the kindness that defied the narrative she had been fed her entire life. James grinned, and for a fleeting moment, the war faded into the background. "You're welcome. We're all just people here, right?" His words struck Liesl like a thunderbolt, igniting a flicker of hope deep within her. The barriers erected by years of hatred and fear began to crack, and she felt a sense of connection that she had never experienced before. As the soldiers moved away, Liesl's heart sank as reality crashed back in. She had shared a moment of humanity with an enemy soldier, but what would happen next? Would the kindness she had just experienced change anything? Would it matter in the face of the larger conflict consuming their lives? Days passed in a blur, each one darker than the last, but Liesl found herself watching the soldiers more closely. She observed their interactions, the way they treated one another and the prisoners. The humanity James had shown her grew in her mind, filling the void of hate she had harbored for so long. It was unsettling to think that she had been wrong about them, about him. One day, as she stood by the fence, she noticed James again. He was sitting on a crate, sharing a laugh with his fellow soldiers. They were singing an old song, one that echoed through the camp like a balm over a wound. The melody was infectious, and without realizing it, Liesl found herself humming along softly. Suddenly, James caught her eye. He stopped singing and waved her over. "Come on, join us, it's a good one." His invitation was genuine, and she felt the pull of his kindness, urging her to break free from the shackles of her upbringing. She hesitated, fear gripping her heart, but the desire to connect overwhelmed her. Gathering her courage, she stepped closer to the fence. I don't know the words," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just listen," he called back, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "You'll pick it up." The other soldiers laughed, and for the first time, Liesl felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. It was an unexpected feeling amidst the cold realities of her existence. As they continued singing, Liesl felt her heart begin to thaw, the barriers she had built around her heart slowly crumbling away. She listened intently, the notes weaving through the air, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. The laughter and music filled the camp, drowning out the echoes of war and despair. But just as she felt herself getting lost in the moment, the camp was shaken by an explosion in the distance. The laughter abruptly ceased, replaced by the harsh sounds of reality crashing back in. Soldiers scrambled to their posts, the camaraderie shattered by the stark reminder of their circumstances. Liesl stepped back, her heart racing, the warmth replaced by ice. James's expression fell, and in that moment the truth became clear. This was not just a game, this was life and death. The war was not over, and the humanity they shared was fragile, like glass on the edge of a precipice. Later that night, as Liesl lay on her cot, the sounds of the camp around her melded into a symphony of fear and uncertainty. She replayed the moments with James, the kindness, the laughter, and suddenly the gravity of it all pressed down on her. She had opened a door to understanding, only to have it slammed shut by the harsh realities of war. But then, a thought struck her, a glimmer of the truth she had stumbled upon. What if this was not the end? What if, amidst the chaos, there was a sliver of hope? She remembered James's smile, the way he had looked at her, as if she were more than just a piece in the war. The next day, she resolved to act. Perhaps it was foolish, but she couldn't shake the feeling that if she could somehow reach out to the soldiers, to James, it might change something, anything. With a newfound determination, she began to collect scraps of paper, writing simple notes during the quiet times. She scribbled words of thanks, of shared humanity, and of hope. It was a small gesture, but it was all she had. When she finally had enough notes, she waited for the right moment. As James and his comrades approached the fence to deliver rations once more, she took a deep breath. With her heart in her throat, she called out to him, "James!" He turned, surprise lighting up his face. "Liesl!" She held out the notes, trembling. "I wanted to give you something." His eyes widened as he took them, the joy in his expression palpable. "What's this?" Just words," she stammered, feeling vulnerable yet empowered. Words of thanks and hope. James's smile widened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You've given me more than you know," he replied softly. As the soldiers walked away, Liesel felt a surge of warmth envelop her. She had stepped into the unknown, bridging the chasm that had divided them. The reality of war still loomed large, but she had taken a step toward rewriting the narrative, one small act of kindness at a time. In that moment, Liesel understood. She had not just changed her perception of the enemy, she had begun to dismantle the walls of hatred that had been built around her heart. And perhaps, through these small connections, hope could flourish even amidst the darkest of times. As she lay back on her cot that night, a soft smile crept across her face. The war was not over, but her heart was no longer heavy with hate. Instead, it was filled with the promise of understanding, the potential for healing, and the undeniable truth that humanity could prevail, even in the most unlikely of places. The cold air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and despair, a stark contrast to the brightness of the sun that dared to shine over the barbed wire fences of the prisoner of war camp. Liesel Müller stood amongst the other women, her heart pounding in her chest as she forced herself not to stare. She couldn't believe her ears. The distant sound of laughter echoed through the cold morning air, a sound that felt utterly alien against the backdrop of her reality. Everything she had been taught, every warning from her superiors, every fear that had kept her alive for months, screamed at her to look away. But she couldn't. A small group of British soldiers had just entered the compound, their sharp uniforms contrasting starkly with the drab, worn-out attire of the prisoners. Liesel's gaze latched onto one soldier in particular, Corporal James Thompson. He was different from the others. There was a softness in his eyes, an air of kindness that disarmed her. She could hardly reconcile the monster she had been led to believe existed with the humanity she saw before her. Days turned into weeks, and Liesel found herself watching James and his comrades from afar. They were tasked with distributing food, their laughter ringing out like a melody in the oppressive silence of the camp. Each interaction she witnessed chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. She noticed the way James smiled at the other prisoners, how he shared his rations, and how he spoke to them not as captives but as fellow human beings. It was a revelation that shook her to the core. In those moments, Liesel began to reflect on her own upbringing. Memories flooded back, her childhood in Nazi Germany, the relentless propaganda that painted the Allies as savages, the fear instilled in her by her family and society. The narrative she had lived by began to unravel, replaced by the growing understanding that the soldiers in front of her were not the demons she had been taught to fear. They were individuals, each with their own stories, their own struggles. The real monsters, she realized, were the ideologies that had pitted them against each other. One chilly morning, as the frost clung to the ground, Liesel found herself standing in line to receive her portion of food. James, standing at the front of the line, caught her eye. In that fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of recognition in his gaze, a silent understanding that transcended the barriers between them. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward, her heart racing. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. James looked surprised, but then a warm smile broke across his face. "You're welcome. It's not much, but it's yours," he said, extending a piece of bread towards her. For the first time, Liesel felt the weight of her fear lift just a fraction. She took the bread from his hand, her fingers brushing against his. A spark ignited within her, a connection that felt almost surreal in the context of war. She could see the kindness in his eyes, a genuine compassion that shattered the shadows of her past. As days passed, Liesel found herself increasingly drawn into conversations with the soldiers. She began to ask questions, sharing snippets of her own life, her hopes, and her fears. Each interaction became a bridge, slowly erasing the lines drawn by hatred and prejudice. James would often sit with her during mealtimes, their exchanges filled with laughter and shared stories, revealing the humanity that lay beneath the surface of uniforms and ranks. But the transformation was not without its struggles. Liesel grappled with feelings of guilt and shame for having once believed in the propaganda that had demonized these men. How could she have been so blind? Yet as she opened her heart, she found solace in the understanding that growth often comes from confronting uncomfortable truths. She began to realize that her journey was not just about seeing the soldiers as human, but also about unraveling her own biases and prejudices. The war dragged on, but the atmosphere within the camp shifted. The soldiers' kindness became a beacon of hope for the prisoners, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, compassion could flourish. Liesel felt a newfound sense of purpose. She began to share her own experiences with the other women in the camp, encouraging them to open their hearts as she had. They started to see the soldiers as individuals too, not merely as captors. As the conflict in Europe drew to a close, the camp was filled with a mix of emotions: relief, apprehension, and uncertainty about the future. For Liesel, the war had changed her drastically. She was no longer the girl who had been indoctrinated by fear. She was a woman forged in the fires of understanding and empathy. On the last day before the camp was scheduled to close, James approached Liesel. The air was thick with unspoken words, a bittersweet awareness of the inevitable separation that loomed ahead. "Liesel," he began, his voice steady, yet tinged with emotion, "I've thought a lot about what we've shared. You've taught me so much about resilience and hope." She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat a painful reminder of the bond they had forged amidst chaos. "You've shown me that compassion exists in the most unexpected places," she replied, her voice trembling. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." James smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "We've been through so much together. I wish things were different, but I'll carry this lesson with me for the rest of my life." As they stood facing each other, the reality of their situation settled in. The world beyond the camp gates awaited them, a world that would no longer be defined by the lines of war. They would part ways, but they would carry the essence of their shared humanity with them, a testament to the power of connection in the face of division. In the weeks and months that followed, Liesel's life took on a new rhythm. The war had ended, but the journey was only beginning. She returned to Germany, where the reality of rebuilding her life unfolded before her. The echoes of laughter from the camp and the warmth of James's smile became a guide